Hi guys, welcome back to Insecta Mundi. This is Steve. And what you see here is a grasshopper in the family Acrididae. Nicely blending in with the leaf surface. Whoop, there it went. And I'm still here in Saitama Prefecture again, sort of in the countryside. And you can see I'm where maybe there's some small townships, residential areas, and various farming plots around here. And of course a lot of insects. Well, there's another acridid sitting on that leaf there. And unlike crickets, grillids, and katydids, pterygoneads, acridids and the like have their ears, or their tympanal organs, near the anterior end of their abdomen. And so, unlike crickets and katydids, which have them on their forelegs, grasshoppers here essentially near their abdomen, pretty close to the thorax. Let's see here. I saw, oh, there we are. I thought I saw these right next to the acridids. You see these black and white objects. There's one, here's another. So these are weevils, and specifically they're in the family Carrionidae. Although in the weevils there's 6 families of weevils. And you can see these are fairly large, and they're feeding on the stems. This one right here perhaps is drilling into the stem, maybe to deposit an egg. Oh, you see just above that weevil there's actually, what is that? That's the lace bug just above it, in the family Tingidae, order Hymenoptera. There's that Carrionid. Now Carrionids are pretty, well, if you take the whole group of weevils as a whole, the superfamily Carrionidea, those contain approximately 60,000 described species, so it's a very large group. If you sort of look at that in the context of beetles as a whole, the order beetles, Coleoptera, have upwards of 350,000 described species. So they are the largest order in terms of species diversity in insects. The runner-up to the beetles are the Lepidoptera, the moths and butterflies, and they have maybe around 180,000 species. And of course these are described. If you compare them to, say, the Hymenoptera, of which here's a parasitoid here. I'm not certain which family that could be a Braconid, a small parasitic wasp in the family Braconidae. If you compare, say, the Hymenoptera, the wasps and bees and parasitoid wasps and such, and sawflies, they have maybe about 125,000 described species. But then the undescribed numbers are just vast, particularly when you get into the tropics. And you can see this little weevil here. This one is in the subfamily Melidinae, within the family Carrionidae. And you can essentially pick out Carpulianids from the other families in which the Carpulianids have elbowed antennae. So if you think about maybe some of the other families of Weevils, say my arm is the antenna, they have a straight antenna. And so the Carpulianids, they have a joint after the first antennal segment. Oh, sorry, the second antennal segment. And so it's elbowed. And so it functions like this. Now Tingids, of which there are quite a few around here, you can see them just sit. Oh, there went one. Here's one. Let's see if we can get one in focus. Tingids, or lacebugs, they have that common name lacebugs because their wings look very lacy. They're sort of very fragile looking and look like an intricately woven fabric of lace. And if you look at one under the microscope, they are really, I mean, they're profoundly beautiful. Their wings, they look like, you could imagine tinted glass, you know, that you might see in a cathedral. And that's what lacebug wings look like. There are these very intricate structures with all sorts of projections that come off of them. Really fabulous looking insects. They are quite small again, so you do need some magnification to see just how beautiful really their wings are. And you can see near the head they have these lobes, and a lot of insects have these modifications on the prothorax just in front of the flight wings. And it's thought that these are sort of ancestral modifications of what you might think of as primitive wings being on the first thoracic segment. But of course, the only functional wings that are found on the insect body are found on the posterior two segments of the thorax. So that's the mesothorax and the metathorax. So the middle and the hind segment of the thorax. And the thorax is made up of three segments that are essentially fused into a functional unit. So you see these lacebugs are just sort of sitting around. Sometimes they're grouped together, and they're a hemipteran, so their mouth parts are modified into stylets. And those are piercing mouth parts that pierce into the plant tissues to feed. Go back to that weevil. Alright guys, I'm still by the roadside here, and here's a butterfly in the family Lycaenidae, or Lycaenidae. And they're somewhat small butterflies, obviously easily spooked, easily disturbed. They're quite fragile, small butterflies. course, in the order Lepidoptera. And the interesting thing about Lycaenids is not perhaps their adult biology, but the immature biology, their larvae or the caterpillars. The caterpillars oftentimes are associated with ants. So just like with various Hymenoptera, like we've seen previously with the scale insects and other types of Hymenopterans, the Lycaenid larvae are often associated with ants. And that's because the Lycaenids will produce appeasement compounds that the ants will consume. And so, again, just like the other insects associated with ants, they're protected by the ants, while at the same time they do produce some excrements that the ants will feed upon as well. But then the caterpillars of the Lycaenids will produce these appeasement chemicals such that the ants will not attack them. And the Lycaenids will have really bizarre morphologies on their body, really strange protrusions coming off of their body, all sorts of different types of hairs or setae. So they're really interesting in terms of their biology. And it's not only the Lycaenids that do this. There's other groups, particularly the family Ryodinidae is another closely related family of butterflies. What I just saw fly by here looks like a wasp in the family Symphyitans. You can see that one. And Symphyitans typically, they're predators too, so they're looking around for prey items to essentially paralyze, to sting and paralyze, and then they'll bring them back to a burrow that they dig into the substrate, into the ground, and they'll lay an egg, typically on the paralyzed victim. And then once that hatches, the larva will start consuming that paralyzed insect. Not a particularly wonderful way to go, but that's life, right? What I saw somewhere over here, you just can't get away from the roadside. There's so many insects. There's different types of insects that come by the roadside because it's an open area. So you get it's a different habitat, right, than the interior forest. So what you see here, I think, there we go, maybe right here, is something that people might be familiar with. Let's see if we can get a better view. Looks like a Lygeid, actually. It's in the family Lygeidae. And here's another one. And this is one of the many families in the order Hymenoptera. Sort of the subclade, the suborder is the Heteroptera, which is where these guys are. They're closely related to the stink bugs and relatives, the family Pentatomidae. And so like the pentatomids and stink bugs and such, these two have, and the other Hymenopterans, these two have these straw-like mouth parts, their proboscis, that they use to feed on the plants. Like this. Here's another Lycaenid. You can see the underside of their wings, quite intricately patterned, much different than the dorsal side of the wing, which is usually, although not always, but usually a sort of bluish color, and it can be kind of metallic blue. And that, of course, is, again, it's due to the scattering pattern of light produced by the structure of the scales on the wing. And then the scales also contribute to the pattern on the underside as well, because scales are covering the entire body of Lepidopterans. Also, if you look at Lycaenids closely, you'll see that their appendages, and often their antennae in particular, have a striped pattern of black and white. Very finely patterned. Very pretty and interesting family of butterflies. Alright guys, we're just walking along this little path here, going into the woods. And what you'll see, well, aside from the giant hornets, the family Vespidae, are another Hymenopteran. But these are not stinging Hymenopterans. They're what you might consider the more primitive Hymenopterans. And these are, the common name are sawflies. Other families have the name wood wasps. They're not wasps. These are phytophagous Hymenopterans, so they're plant feeding. Okay? Unlike the majority of Hymenoptera that are parasitic, they're parasitoids, they parasitize other insects, or they directly prey upon other insects. The more primitive groups, which collectively used to be referred to as the Symphyitans, these families are phytophagous, they're plant feeding. Okay, so this one in particular is in the family Tenthrodinidae. Probably out here, maybe perhaps looking for a mate, or perhaps looking for a suitable place to oviposit, to deposit an egg on the leaf surface. And some of the Tenthrodinids around here, at least, are quite beautiful. They're a metallic green color. An easy way to sort of identify the more primitive Hymenopteran groups is that they don't have a constriction kind of at where the waist would be. So between the thorax and the abdomen, the more primitive Hymenoptera, like these Tenthrodinids, they don't have a constricted area there. It's kind of a continuous wide outline going from the thorax to the abdomen. Whereas in the parasitic, the majority of Hymenoptera, they have a constriction there at their waist. These Tenthrodinids are not always very active. They're just kind of sitting there. And right next to that, there's actually some very tiny flies in the order Diptera. These could be in the family Simuliidae. I'm not entirely certain. See if we can, kind of difficult to focus on these. They're very small, just maybe about 1/2 centimeter in length. Looks like there might be one female and one male, actually. The larger one perhaps is the female. And it looks like there's perhaps some sort of courtship dance going on. You can see the Tenthrodinid there on the right. There we go. Very tiny flies. But of course, oh, that right there is a common name is a sulfur butterfly or a cabbage butterfly. Those are in the family Pieridae. It's kind of hard to get a closer view of those because they're almost constantly fluttering around. Oh, but what I was about to say is, of course, you know, the purpose, one of the many purposes of doing this is to show people, you know, not all insects, actually quite few of them, are large, gaudy looking, flashy organisms, although actually a lot of them are quite spectacular. But a lot of them are small, right? Perhaps most of the diversity of insects are sort of at the micro scale. They're tiny things. And actually, you know, when you look at these tiny things up close, you just need more magnification, right? And when you apply that magnification, you can really see sort of the beauty at their microscopic level. And you can see the intricate patterns and kind of designs that are on their body. You know, from the scale patterning to intricate cuticular patterns that they have, to all sorts of different types of setae or hairs on their body. You know. So it's good to appreciate, you know, the smaller things in life, as you might say. Alright guys, I just rolled this log over here a little bit into the woods and happened upon some sort of Scarab Beetle. So the family Scarabaeidae. This is what looks to be the larval shed skin, and perhaps it was quite recent. Actually, I don't know if it was from this individual. Where did he go? Oh, maybe I lost him already. Oh, there he is. Or she, I'm not sure. There's this scarab right here. There we go. Scarabaeidae is a quite large group itself, not just in species numbers, but also kind of ecological niches. You have the pretty large beetles like rhinoceros beetles, to the very tiny scarabs that can be actually associated with things like gopher burrows. And you can usually spot scarab larvae. Actually, this looks like one right here. By the sort of C shape to their body. Okay, so you have the head up here, and then sort of three pairs of long thoracic legs, and you have the C shape. So a lot of the excrement, they build up in the abdomen. That's why it typically takes on a kind of dark color, because they're constantly ingesting food matter and rotting logs and such. All right, so one of the last times I think we encountered an adult Myrmeleontid, the adult form of the Antlion. And here at the base of this tree, so you can see it's below some foliage above, and below you see a bunch of the pits. And if you haven't encountered these before, this is what they are. So these are the pits constructed by the antlions, and the construction of them it's quite amazing actually for a little larva. So what they do is they'll be on the surface of the pit, or before a pit has been constructed, they'll be on the surface of the substrate, and then they sort of twirl around, but not forwards, they move backwards. You essentially will never see antlions moving forwards. They always back up. And so it twirls around backwards while also flinging the substrate out of the pit, usually with its head, kind of like a forklift in a way. And so it twirls around, flinging the substrate out. And they construct their pits in such a way that the angle is just right to capture. Oh, see that one? I think a small ant just fell into that pit. And so they construct them at just the right angle such that you kind of get the insects falling in, and it's very difficult for them to escape. Very nice. Now, usually don't do this, but we're gonna, oh, looks like one was moving in here, so we can probably extract this one. Sorry about this, buddy. I'm gonna try to dig out the larva here. So the larva is waiting at the base with its mandibles open. Sometimes it can be a little challenging to find these. They're so well camouflaged with the substrate that if you don't dig it up right away, you kind of lose it. Which is what I may have just done. Oh, no, there it is. See that? On the side here? That's your antlion larva right here. There it is. And you're seeing that on the right side here are these long mandibles. Look at that. And you see its legs are sticking out. They kind of use them as oars to move through the sand, like moving through an ocean of sand. And so they wait at the bottom of their pits with these mandibles wide open. I mean, almost at 180 degree angle. And when an animal, an insect, falls to the bottom of the pit, it triggers long setae that are also on the mandibles. You can't really see them here, but there's long setae on the mandibles, all over the body as well. And so when something touches those setae, those mandibles then rapidly close shut. You see how it's moving backwards? They can dig very fast. Antlions, very, very interesting animals. They're easy to rear as well. So, you know, if you were to just dig some of these up, carry some of the substrate home with you, and then they'll make their pit again. You have to make sure there's enough substrate in there. And they'll remake their pit, and you just have to make sure to drop, you know, some insects in there once in a while. They don't have to be alive. And eventually, you know, they'll pupate, and you'll have adult antlions. So, you know, very interesting insects, for sure. Okay, I've captured a few ants in here. Let's see if we can't trigger some of these. If I can get it to fall in the right place. Yep, they seem to be escaping. Oh, do you see that? Oh. Oh, looks like he was captured. See it being pulled underneath. So you see, it's the insects do escape. Oh, this one over here got out of the other pit, but then it fell into this pit. So you see, I mean, it's like a minefield here. Except you can see pits, but you can't see the mines, right? The larvae, they're hidden underneath. It's a very treacherous area over here if you're an insect. So that's what antlions do. You know, it's a really marvelous, fascinating, it's not marvelous if you're the prey item, but for the antlions, it's a really interesting, fascinating way of hunting for prey. It's essentially almost using tools to capture your prey, except these are insects. Right? Very fascinating creatures. All right, I was walking along here, and near this bush, you'll see another type of Scarab Beetle. People in the US might be familiar with these. The common name is Japanese beetle. Papillas Japonica. And they're introduced into the US. They're not native to the United States. And they're more of a turf pest, so a pest of grass, or maybe of golf courses and such, because the larvae eat the roots of many types of grasses. But they're native to Japan. And here they're not a pest. You saw before that it had its hind legs outstretched, so I think it saw me, and it was ready to drop to the ground, which it still is. I think here in Japan they have maybe 2 generations per year, so it might be on the 2nd generation here. And they're actually fairly pretty Scarab beetles. You know, they have this metallic green color mixed with brown and some white markings. And you'll see, right, if you disturb the Japanese beetle, they'll usually, well, this one isn't so ready to drop to the ground. But usually if you disturb them, they'll drop quite quickly. Alright, here's sort of in this open wooded area, and find another really pretty Nymphalid butterfly. Some nice white markings on the tip of its wings. And again, like so many butterflies and moths, typically butterflies though, the dorsal patterning is very different from the ventral patterning on the wings. And this is because when they're resting, they will open and close their wings and show different types of maybe disturbance patterns to frighten off would-be predators. This one's not staying still for very long. Perhaps I've disturbed it a bit too much. In the background, of course, you can hear the cicadas. You can virtually hear the cicadas all of the time in the summer here. Okay, walking around one of these sort of open wooded areas again gives you a chance to see a lot of different insects. Here, let's see if we can visualize it without disturbing it. Underneath this leaf, you can see the tops, or what would be the ventral surface of the wings. And I think that's actually a Peralid moth. Oh, no, it might be something different. Oh, fascinating. This is what looks to be a Sasiid moth, the family Sasiidae. A lot of them have these striking patterns, well, much like a lot of different Lepidopteran groups that have these visually striking patterns and colors. It usually advertises that they're distasteful to predators, so they're sequestering various toxic compounds in their body. That's certainly what these do, these Sasiids. From the, just from looking at it, you know, when it was obscured by the leaf, the wing patterns resembled another family of moths, the Peralidae, which a lot of them will have that kind of, this black and white wing pattern. It's a very pretty moth. Close by, saw another interesting beetle on this leaf here. And that, not terribly sure what this is. This looks to be a Hysterid, perhaps. A Hysteric Beetle. Oops, sorry about that. Oh. Hysterids tend to be found in logs. And they're often quite flat, so they sort of hide underneath the bark. Hysterid beetles. And they're often black colored. That one was a brown. And looky over here, just nearby, sort of hidden in the foliage here. Oh, look at this, guys. What is that? just saw it creeping by. What is this? Oh, fantastic. Well, guys, this is it's a phasmid of some type. It's a stick insect. Seems to have lost 2 of its legs. And perhaps it molted recently because its body is very soft. Very slow-moving insects, phasmids are. And of course they're harmless. They're phytophagous insects. They eat plants. Put this one back. Stick insects in Southeast Asia, they can get extremely large. More than upwards of 70 centimeters in length are some of the longest ones, which is some really big insects. So big insects just did not occur, in the Permian or in the past. Currently, there's a lot of extremely large insect taxa that are living. Very pretty stick insect. And the other cool thing about stick insects are not just the adults and their body form. Of course, their body form is very interesting because it's evolved to mimic vegetation. Actually, as a lot of insects have evolved to do as well. But if you look at the eggs of stick insects, they're really quite fascinating structures. They typically will look like or mimic seeds of various plants. And so the stick insects will just drop them to the ground, and they'll be hidden in the vegetation, in the leaf litter, and so they'll just sit there until they hatch. And there are some species actually where the mimicry is so good of the seeds, such that they will get carried into the nests of some ants that are collecting seeds and other vegetative matter to feed to their brood. And so what happens is that, these stick insect eggs get carried into the ant nests. Well, that's a big problem, right? So when the eggs hatch, the immature stage, the first instar of the stick insect, will resemble an ant. And so their first task of survival essentially is to run out of that nest as quickly as possible. And then they'll go about to carry on their lives feeding on vegetation. So life is full of peril, right? For insects as well. So just near to that log where we saw the stick insect is this tree, and here's another big sap flow on this tree, actually just above that. What are these? What is that, guys? These are immature stages of assassin bugs in the family Ryodinidae. Where did it go? There it is. And assassin bugs are aptly named because they assassinate other insects. So they're active predators. And just nearby them actually look like some some click bugs, or click beetles, as they're called. Where is it? Oh, it just dropped to the ground. Click beetles are in the family Elateridae, and they're named such because they make a clicking noise, which is produced when they lock a certain part of their prothorax with sort of a groove in their adjacent thoracic segment, the mesothorax. And so then it pops it to make a clicking noise. And that's actually a predator escape mechanism, because they will sort of jump a little bit when they do that. I'm trying to look at this. Here's an interesting insect. Near this sap flow, you'll see this little pile of moving debris. And, you know, these are really curious because that most likely underneath is a lacewing in the family Chrysopidae. So it's in the order Neuroptera. And the larvae are very similar to the Antlion larvae in that they have these large mandibles, actually into which fit the maxilla as well, another mouth part. And so they use these, they stick these giant sickle-shaped mandibles into their prey items like a hypodermic needle, and they secrete digestive enzymes while at the same time sucking out the contents. But the cool thing about the green lacewing larvae is that they pile on their backs, you know, all sorts of debris items for camouflage. And it's also for protection against parasitoids that try to come by and parasitize them. And just nearby, we see this sap flow here. And you see all of these flies that are flying around it. These are mostly fruit flies, or pomace flies, in the family Drosophilidae. And you know, Drosophilids are not just these fruit flies that fly around your kitchen table, you know, during breakfast and feed off of any fruit. They're a really large and diverse group of flies, upwards of 3,000, maybe 3,500 species. And they live in a range of habitats. They can be sort of parasites themselves. They can parasitize other hemipterans. The larvae do. Or they'll feed on, you know, all sorts of different types of rotting, decaying plant matter. And here, you'll just see all of these Drosophilids just feeding on this sap flow coming out of the tree. There's also another interesting fly that's feeding on this sap flow. Where is it? There it is. That looks, I think these are Micropeezids in the family Micropeezidae. And you see they have fairly long legs for flies. More sort of similar to crane flies in that regard. Here's one down below. There it is, feeding with the Drosophilids. And sometimes they'll lay their eggs in these areas as well. Like I say, all sorts of insects come to these sap flows. I was hoping that maybe we'd find some larger scarab beetles or such, or maybe sometimes lucanids, but those usually come out maybe towards the evening or during the night to feed. So we won't necessarily find them at this time. See a lot of, it's like a buffet here, these sap flows. I think there was another insect that I saw moving around below. This one is even more difficult to see because of its camouflage. Let me see here. Oh, just scaring all the flies. Is this it? I'm not sure. I thought there was maybe a bark bug here. I think that might be it. Can't see very well what that is. There's another one down here. This is either a bark bug in the family Ryodinidae, Hymenopter, or it could actually be the larval case of a Lepidopteran, a case that's produced by the family Tineidae, the clothes moths family. Well, that might be what it is actually. Interesting. So there's a whole bunch of different things feeding here. Alright, walking through this kind of open hickory grove here. Maybe you can't see this too well, but there's a dragonfly positioned right on that little stem. Looks to be another species in the family Libellulidae. A very pretty one. And these different colors in dragonflies and many insects as well are produced by different pigments that are deposited in the cuticle. These are different chemical compounds. They can be proteins as well that are deposited in the cuticle, and they can produce various types of colors, from reds to greens, white compounds as well. White colors often are produced by uric acid, which is a waste material. So I'm walking through this chestnut grove here. And aside from, when you're out looking for insects, aside from just trying to see insects that are perched, or, you can use various methods. Perhaps I'll discuss those some other time. Methods like sweeping with a net. You can also look for, and this is with respect to, there's a big Vespid hornet. It was drinking water off of a leaf. In respect to phytophagous insects or plant-feeding insects, you can look for the feeding damage on the plants. And this is done with fossils as well. There can be feeding traces on fossil plants left by insects, millions of years ago. And so, you can look for obvious damage on the leaf like this. This is totally defoliated right here. But there are some very interesting feeding patterns that can be found. And particularly here, I did see a method employed by some insects, which is called trenching. And here, this leaf is a good example right here. You'll see at this stem, there's a bunch of notches cut into the stem. See that? And then there's a bunch of missing leaf beyond those notches. Okay. So what happened was the insect cut these trenches to restrict the flow of usually some sort of sap material, some sort of toxic compound that flows through the veins of the leaf. And so when they trench, they cut off the flow of those toxins, and so they can then feed beyond that area without consuming the toxins. Oh, there's a nice Symphyitid. Here's another example of trenching. Now you see those trenching patterns, and then beyond that is where the insect is feeding. So that's useful, for insects that can't necessarily consume toxic compounds. Whereas many other insects, they simply have evolved the ability to withstand consuming those toxic compounds, and they will either metabolize and excrete those, or they will retain them in their body and they can use them for other metabolic purposes. Sometimes they will deposit them in the cuticle and they can be sort of repurposed for other metabolic processes, and even they can go towards producing pigment compounds. Now here, since maybe it's about to rain somewhat hard, you see more of these pretty large psychedelids hanging out below the leaves. Alright, I'm walking along the road here, and you can see some other methods of feeding on some of these leaves. One in particular that you can see on this leaf is called skeletonizing. And so, simply put, the insect will feed on the tissue in between all the small veins in the leaf. Okay, so they're eating the more nutritious mesophyll of the leaf, and they're leaving behind the tougher veins. Right, so this is also a pretty easy way to visualize the vast vein network within a leaf that you really don't normally see. People often will pay attention, of course, to the larger veins on the leaf, but then much like the vertebrate vascular system, there's this tiny network of veins feeding all the different tissues. Right, I'm here near this roadside kind of ditch. There's a little stream down below. This is a good area for some perhaps aquatic insects. There's already another dragonfly right there. Perhaps looking for its next meal. This might also be a taxon in the family Libelulidae. Perhaps looking out for maybe these. These are Peralid moths, family Peralidae. And a lot of the immature stages tend to be semi-aquatic or aquatic, kind of living near damp, moist habitats. They sort of resemble little fighter jets in sort of the shape of their wings and how they hold them when they're resting. Peralids are a very diverse family themselves, living in all sorts of different habitats. Actually, as I move through here, you can actually see the movement of a lot of these moths. Those are all Peralids. The larvae are probably living near this sort of drainage area. This is a larva, caterpillar larva that or lepidopteran larva that I've seen before, but I'm not terribly certain what it is. It's got an interesting pattern. It's black with yellow spots. Its head is towards the right, and it has this interesting spine at its posterior end. I don't think it's the immature of this Peralid, but could be mistaken. Alright guys, I've stumbled back into a wooded area again, and near this plant there's Hymenopter, and it looks to be maybe in the family Scolidae. Scolidae resemble hornets, but they typically might make burrows in the ground, nests in the ground. There's one right there. So we're sort of in this small wooded area near the road. There's also a bit of a bamboo forest here. Bamboo forests usually aren't particularly rich in insect diversity. But we'll see what we can find. Alright guys, there's a lot of mosquitoes around here, but I'll try to hold the camera fairly steady as I swat them away. Here is a cricket in the family Grillidae. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen crickets before. This one is a female. And crickets are quite interesting actually. They might be fairly mundane to people. But you see, this female has a very long ovipositor. It has two long, what are termed cerci, sticking from the hind end of the abdomen. And in between and below, you'll see that long ovipositor. Okay? And that works like a hypodermic needle. to deposit eggs into the soil. So you'll see females, usually maybe at night, they will be sticking that ovipositor into the soil, into the substrate, and depositing these elongated eggs. Quite interesting crickets are. And like katydids, they have their tympana, or their hearing organs, on their front legs. And actually, crickets, to assist in the directionality of their hearing, I just had 4 mosquitoes on my hand. To assist in the directionality of their hearing, they actually have a septum in the middle of their prothorax. And this septum lies between 2 tracheal trunks, which is their respiratory system. And these tracheal trunks each lead into the foreleg of the cricket. And so actually, these tracheae help amplify the sound that is received by these tympana. Okay, and that septum in the middle helps divide the sounds that are received from the left and right legs. Very interesting. Also, the ovipositor itself. Well, there's a nice swallowtail that's flying up above. Oh. Still here in this bamboo forest, of course. Oh, there's 2 swallowtails. And the Papillionidae. Oh. Sorry, I won't make you guys too dizzy. So ovipositors are really interesting because they're modified appendages, right? So just like the mouth parts are modified appendages, the ovipositor is as well. And so, oh, there's a snake actually. Oh, it got away. And so you have these, you can take the cricket ovipositor as an example. This long hypodermic needle-like ovipositor. It's quite stiff, yet flexible. And it's formed by actually the appendages of 2 abdominal segments. In the mouth parts, when you have these elongate hypodermic needle-like mouth parts, termed stylets, or styletiform mouth parts, those are also modified appendages. So you have convergent evolution yet again of these elongated appendages, the mouth parts, say in a mosquito or in a hemipteran, and then these elongated stylets, modified appendages on the abdomen in the form of an ovipositor. So it's really quite fascinating to see how evolutionary pressures have formed similar structures at opposite ends of the body in many insect groups. Hey guys, I was walking along the path here and I saw this hole, and there was an insect inside of it, sort of waving its antennae about. So I coaxed it out of there, and it's this cricket. But it's a cricket I haven't seen before. Look at that, look at its head. There it went in again. This might be a predaceous cricket, I'm not certain. It's certainly new to me. And it had these, I don't know if you got a look of it, it had these extensions, or these extensions on its head. Look at that. This must be a predaceous one. Very interesting. show you the dorsal surface of its head. It's very peculiar grillid. You can see the mirror that's on its wings. Right? The mirror is a big window within all these veins. Oh wow, look at that, the front of its head. The mirror is within all these veins on the wing, and it helps amplify the sound of the cricket when it's stridulating, because it rubs up. You can kind of see it there. It moved its wings into a position for singing, because it rubs two edges of its wings together to produce the typical cricket chirping sound. This is just a really fascinating taxon. Its head just looks really strange. Look at that. You can see its large mandibles. Huh. I'll have to find out what that is later. See if I can get a slightly better view. Oh, I think I scared it away. Very interesting. It's hiding in this little burrow. I'm not sure if it made this burrow. It's quite large, but yeah, I don't know. All right, walking along this path, I stumbled upon this beetle here, and it is a carrion beetle in the family, well, depending on which classification you follow. It was in the family Symphyitans, but it technically is in the family Staphylinidae now. And it shows what carrion beetles do best. It's feeding, along with his ants, feeding on what looks like maybe a deceased larva of some sort. Just quietly nibbling away. Guys, it's pretty difficult to stay with this one, but what you see there moving very quickly is, the common name is a hummingbird hawk moth. It's in the family Symphyitans, and as you can see, their flight pattern pretty much resembles a hummingbird, and what it's doing is that it's visiting flowers very quickly, obviously. Now, Symphyitans in general, or hawk moths, is their common name for the family. They're very agile, quick flyers in general. But hummingbird hawk moths really are quite quick, and they're very good flyers. So good, in fact, that they can hover quite well. I may have lost it right there. Yeah, probably lost it. But these Symphyitans, these hummingbird hawk moths, as you can see, they're really great flyers, and they can hover while feeding from each flower. Now, they're not the only ones that can hover. There's a whole family of flies, for instance, the Syrphids, family Symphyitans, that are well known for being great hoverers. And there's other fly groups as well that can hover as well. So those hummingbird hawk moths are not the only ones, but they're certainly really interesting moths. Their proboscis is also very long to reach typically into the long corolla tube of the flowers. Okay. And also when they're flying, they, like I said, they resemble hummingbirds, not only just in their sort of flight pattern, but also just in the form of their body. So towards the posterior end of the abdomen, there's sort of a fan of very elongated scales that makes it look like the tail of a hummingbird. Pretty cool lepidopterans. Alright guys, walking along the trail here, stumbled upon a pretty large ground beetle in the family Carabidae. It's a pretty nicely colored one as well. This metallic green and kind of yellowish pattern. And of course what these carabids are doing, they're just running along looking for various other insects to feed upon, because they are predators. Where did he go? Pretty impressive, right? Okay guys, just as I mentioned, hovering, being in some other insect groups, stumbled upon a syrphid, so hoverflies. You can see it hovering right there. Really remarkable flight ability. And you can see how large the compound eyes are on this syrphid. Just pretty typical for the family. And so what they're doing, because they're such active flyers, they have to pretty much constantly feed on nectar resources. And you'll also see the color patterning of this syrphid, which is, again, fairly typical of this family. They tend to mimic the color pattern of various vespid wasps. And of course, syrphids themselves are not harmful. They're harmless. But they mimic another organism that is harmful. And so that type of mimicry is called Batesian mimicry, where you have an organism that is harmless mimicking an organism that is harmful or toxic or poisonous or venomous. And so that makes it such that predators might tend to avoid the insect that's mimicking the dangerous one. Because the predators will see that color pattern, which they typically know to avoid. And so they'll leave be any organism that has that color pattern. Hoverflies, family Syrphidae. So on that note, guys, I think we might call it a day. It's getting darker out, and I think the rain is coming. Perhaps the periphery of the next typhoon that's making its way towards the land. And I'm getting eaten alive by these mosquitoes. Maybe I had a slightly sweeter coffee than normal. So I hope you enjoyed this little outing today. Get to hear the final sounds of the cicadas and the various orthopterans that are singing. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time on Insecta Mundi.